My name is GERALD GILLESPIE. I'm a member of the Spirituality Resource Center here in Salina and have been a member since its founding approximately 25 years ago. And the mission of SRC, as we call it, has been to affirm the exploration of all people's spiritual journey, supporting their work on body, mind, and spirit. And as part of that mission, SRC has planned, promoted, and developed a number of programs, hosted a number of programs in the Salina community with well-known presenters, workshops, and so on over those many years. And the range of those is quite diverse. We've really had speakers addressing a lot of the major faith and religious traditions of the world. And we gained our kickoff really as an organization when we had Houston Smith here, who is well known internationally for his book on world religions. And over those many years, we've hosted a wide range of programs, from the nature of money to a number of different theologians and people in the health and healing professions. And in recent years, we've been focusing on the focusing on the Charter for Compassion, which is an international movement centered on precisely really the mission of SRC. And as a consequence, we've had encouraged a number of people in the community to address issues and talk about facets of the Charter for Compassion. And that work has eventually precipitated concern and interest in community conversations on a number of issues related to the Charter for Compassion. And those conversations and dialogue amongst ourselves helped us realize how insulated a lot of the conversations in the community are, and how polarized a lot of those conversations are. And interestingly enough, we discovered there were several others in the community, including other organizations, interested in doing more with community conversation. And that led us to an encounter with Thea and some work she's been doing. And so Thea can share more about that project and why we're really here tonight.
Thanks. I'm really honored to be able to work with the SRC. I've been trying to learn to become a public deliberation facilitator for the last several years, and then in the last several months, Greg Stevens and I have been trying to put together a community, or maybe we could call it a Center for Public Life. It'll be affiliated with the Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy in Manhattan, and also with the Kettering Foundation. And the purpose, one of the main purposes of that group will be to encourage people to have the kind of public deliberation that SRC is looking for in terms of crossing the barriers that people usually have when they have those conversations. So our goal is to give Salina citizens the chance to listen to a wide range of views on topics of local concern, and then weigh the options after they hear all those different views, and then make a judgment about which approaches they think align with what's important to them, both as individual citizens and for our whole community. So I'm pleased we can show tonight what it looks like to have a public deliberation. We're going to go through the steps of that public deliberation, talking about public deliberation. So it's a little double thing here, but the viewers will have the chance to see how it goes when we work with a regular issue. We begin a public deliberation by having some guidelines, some agreements about how we're going to talk. So the suggestion from the Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy, I'll give you those suggestions, and then you can say whether you agree with them and if you have anything to add. So at K-State, we say that we want to agree that we'll seek understanding and common ground, we'll expect and explore conflicting viewpoints, differences, we'll give everyone the opportunity to speak, we'll listen respectfully and thoughtfully, we'll appreciate communication differences. That means some people are going to speak from the heart, some people are going to speak from the head, some people are going to tell stories, and some people are going to tell statistics. We're going to try to stay focused on the issue, which in this case is public deliberation and democracy and barriers. And then we're going to respect time limits. So we're not going to take up all the time. One person's not going to take up all the time. So does that seem okay to you, or do you want to add anything? Okay, so are you willing to kind of follow those guidelines?
Yes.
And
Sure.
if somebody doesn't follow them, are you willing to say, hey, you're not following that guideline about listening thoughtfully? Or, so,
Sure.
All right, we'll do that then.
Yeah.
So our question tonight is, how does public deliberation support community democracy, and especially how does it break barriers when we talk with people who have different views? So public deliberation is about looking at the costs and the consequences of possible solutions to what are sometimes called wicked problems, or problems that have a lot of pieces to them. When we have the deliberation, we try to find out what people think, and then we try to find out for ourselves what we'll accept as a solution or not. So in this conversation that we're having tonight, we're thinking about the relationship among deliberation, democracy, and our role as citizens, and our role as citizens who want all views to be represented, because everybody's view is important in a democracy, of course. Now, some people think that since our democracy was never intended to be direct, it's always been representative form of government, that a citizen's role is to vote and be kind to their neighbor. We may also think that it causes division to talk about politics, or religion, or personal values, especially to someone we don't know well. So we back away from talking about any kind of controversial topic. We think that it's not really polite to engage in those kind of conversations. Now, other people think that a citizen's responsibility just begins with voting, that it's really part of a citizen's responsibility to identify and discuss community concerns and to listen to people's views who are different than our own. We even think we might have to change how we act, or we might have to change what we think about what's good for everybody. So the second way of thinking about this is, or another way of thinking about this, is that we need to hear views that are different than our own, because in a democracy we're all equal and everyone should have a voice. So those are kind of the tensions in this conversation. There's no right or wrong, there's no black or white, but there's kind of a tension between those ideas. So let's begin with an opening round where everybody has a chance to introduce themselves, and then just tell us why you're here tonight. What brought you here to talk about democracy and breaking barriers? GERALD told us a little bit organizationally, but I invite you to say something personal, an experience or an awareness or something that matters to you that brought you here tonight. David, you want to start?
I'm David Hanson. I'm a family physician that semi-retired but still work at the VA taking care of veterans, and those are the segment of the population that I deal with primarily. And as I've learned, being a member of the Spiritual Resource Center, is that information isn't necessarily knowledge. Knowledge is not necessarily wisdom. And yet I see the frustration in my veterans that are bombarded with so much information that it's hard for them to put it together in a rational ways that they can come up with a thoughtful way either to change their lifestyle or to interact politically. And one of the things of compassionate conversation is to try to remove those barriers and open up a dialogue, a compassionate dialogue, that allows us to hear these sides and hopefully come to agreement that might change us and hopefully change people that we're having the dialogue with.
I'm Roger Harmon. I'm a retired psychotherapist. So I've always been in conversation with people. I've always learned a lot from people. I think never a day has gone by that I haven't learned something new from someone I've worked with or been with. I'm also a retired Methodist minister, and so I'm concerned about what is sacred. And it seems to me in our world today, we've really lost the sense of sacred. And one of the things that I think is sacred is when we make intimate contact and conversation with people. I think those are really precious moments, they're holy moments.
I'm Elizabeth Bryan. I'm an entrepreneur in Salina. I'm not really sure why I'm here, except that I was invited, and I am very concerned that where we live it's no longer a democracy, and I think part of it is because we live in a world that's very polarized, and I think listening is part of the way to work through that polarization.
I'm David CARLSON, and I think that a part of this kind of dialogue has to effectively deal with fear. Because I know that many times when I hear a different opinion that is very strong, my reaction is to not get into a discussion, because I know what their feeling is, and if I say what my feeling is, that you lose a friend, or you really are not able to come to any kind of understanding that strengthens your relationship. And that's why it's so good to be a part of this kind of a conversation, because when I'm in this group, there's no fear that of not acceptance and listening, because I know that is such an important part of what we do. And the challenge is when I am with other people away from here that I can be able to feel the strength to be able to confront, maybe isn't the right word, but to actually have dialogue that is fruitful.
I'm GERALD GILLESPIE, and I teach in Salina, and as a consequence, I'm always dealing with students and others with different perspectives on things. And I've really come to realize very deeply that as a teacher, one has to be very much a student, because a lot of students provide teaching moments for me and for others, and it's enriched that sense of what needs to be done in a larger conversation on issues in the larger community, in the larger society. Because I think democracy really, as I grew up learning about what that is really at risk in our culture at this point. And part of that is from ignorance, part of that is from the fact that you know, if we're to be changed, we also have to be able to stay focused on all the aspects of an issue or question or problem. And the attentional demands in our culture that stretch us out and deflect that attention and keep us from being focused are everywhere. And I see that in students, I know it in myself, I see it in others. And so the culture itself doesn't allow for the deep conversations and the focused attention to issues that I think we need, especially when the problems are so serious, around us right now. So I think really this is an extension of that exploration of the problem of really good conversation, which I think is lacking in amongst all of us and most communities, I think.
I'm LANAY MEIER, and I'm a retired RN and currently working as a licensed addiction counselor. And I came to the Spirituality Resource Group a number of years ago out of my own growth process, moving hopefully deeper into who I am. And I really think I've been interested in community conversation for some time. I work primarily all those years, 48 years of nursing and then currently the addictions. I've worked primarily in mental health and addictions. So I've seen the struggle that so many people have in feeling like they're valued and that they have a voice and that they're counted. And my heart really reaches for them to know that they do have dignity and worth, and they have a right to their truth. We all have a truth. And so this kind of opportunity for me opens up hopefully those doors to bring more people to the table, knowing and letting them know that yes, you are important, you are somebody, and we want to hear from you because you're as important as we are. So I'm hoping this process will continue to open that door for the community.
I'm David Norland. I'm a retired professor from Kansas, not from Kansas West End, that would be Gerald Gillespie, but from Cloud County Community College. But Gerald's discussion about classroom interaction is so important, and LANAY's is so important about the worth of the individual. All of these statements have been so valuable. But what strikes me is that what I miss in my day-to-day interaction amongst all the distractions that Gerald refers to is that ability to come together and to really talk as genuine human beings about issues that matter. And I tried in my poor way in a college classroom to make that happen, to bring that together. And it strikes me that there's so few opportunities that in many ways a college classroom is one setting where, or any classroom is one setting where that can happen. And the SRC has been another setting so valuable to me where that kind of conversation happens, and I echo what's been said so far. I am depressed and grieving in the extreme to the degree to which misinformation pervades the public dialogue. Elizabeth referred to that, to the divisions that are out there, and to the lack of information, and to, my perception is, of the general powerlessness of many people in the population, which results, I think, and you may take this as a political statement, but on the eve, the just past eve of the second Republican debate for presidential candidates, the disparity, the lack of any, to me at least, seeming solutions. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I've had people on the street say the same thing to me. So what about me? What about the working man? A fellow who was working at our house today said exactly that. What do I care how good a businessman one presidential candidate was, or how good looking Carly Fiorina is or not? What bearing does that have? So the lack of depth in a conversation and the need for a discussion about issues that are, as Gerald says, so critical in this time when so many institutions are failing us is just, it's critical. It's just critical. So.
My name's Paul KRUMM. I live 30 miles west of town. I'm out in the country, off the grid, trying to do a little bit more towards sustainability and resilience. In transition only, though, I recognize. The concern I bring, I guess, today is has to do with the importance that is given to freedom, and the fact that freedom is used in a way of taking care of myself and my close friends and my family, and it doesn't acknowledge the need for community and caring for a larger, the larger humanity in the earth. Without the moral understanding of freedom, we have effectively freedom to hurt people that are not our close community. And to use the vernacular, it's the freedom to fuck your brother.
Okay, well, let me give you a first question. Let's consider some reasons that you or maybe others have for leaving decisions on public matters to elected officials. Does anyone have any thoughts on why we might, as a community, leave decisions on public affairs to public officials and not?
Well, there is kind of a kind of top-down perspective that the politician is supposed to be the one who really is in the know. But what it seems like is that we only really get what information people want us to know, and that isn't always accurate.
Well, with the percentage of people that actually vote indicates that there's a serious problem. And I think that it certainly deals with the willingness of people to be able to dialogue, willingness of people to listen and read or understand the issues. And so I think it is true. Our politicians get by with doing whatever they want.
I think politicians are bought and sold. and they do what the highest bidder wants them to do. So what I have to say really doesn't have a whole lot of influence. I always feel like we have to take it to the streets. But then I'm a warrior, so I see it that way. But yeah, and I don't know if that's so much. Well, yeah, I do think it's also statewide that way too. They use ALEC a lot to write the laws that are really ruining Kansas. So how do you go against all that money to say, we really would like it done this way? Can you do that? How do you do that?
I would like to go back to Reverend Carlson's comment about people having anxiety and fear. I believe they look at the human systems that are failing them, whether they're ecological, social, cultural, political, and rather than face these complex, cascading problems, I think they result to simplistic answers, and they're prone to this ideologue, short statements that come down from our politicians. And this is not the way to handle these type of problems. There has to be an open dialogue and community education to help with this.
And to sort of channel the working man today that I mentioned earlier, I don't think I'm putting words in his mouth to say, here he is, and he would say, I'm working hard on this project, I don't have it, I'm trying to make enough income, as Paul indicated, to feed myself and my family. And I have an expectation that these people who know more, allegedly, and have more access to information are going to do something for me. And it seems, from his perspective, a reasonable assumption. But I want to just mention also briefly, Elizabeth, that as you said, having run for office, when you run for office, you look for donations. And there are people from, I'm choosing only one, the Highway Association, who are happy to supply that if they think you're going to be in favor of building highways. And sometimes highways are a good idea, but maybe schools are more important. So the candidate, to be a little sympathetic, finds him or herself in a position where they get funding, but they then really have to realistically evaluate. But there is value associated with highways and schools. So who are you going to listen to?
David, you mentioned that the percentage of voters is low, and I'm sure there's numerous reasons for that. Busyness, lack of understanding. But going back to my original comment earlier, I think some people just don't feel like they matter, and that they have a voice. Who's going to listen anyway? Who am I? I don't, I'm just a number. And so that kind of attitude hits, and then there goes your energy, and so they don't vote.
Yeah, I think there is that deep sense of powerlessness that people feel, and fear. Like what David's saying. We resort to, we retreat to some sort of secure understanding, even though it might be too simple, because the problems are indeed very complex. But one of the things that struck me in thinking about the concerns people have about politicians too is this whole notion of corruption. We talk about corruption in Washington, corruption, and if you go back to the early founding fathers' times, we oftentimes think of corruption as related to, money going under the table and moving off to various politics, various concerns and so on. But really, it was more narrowly defined there that at that time, I believe, as corruption being where your political and narrow representative interests are so narrow that it neglects the common good. Yes. And it neglects the community. That's when the system gets corrupted. And I think that's partly what we're seeing, because it does contribute to that feeling of powerlessness that politicians are not representing the common good, they're not supporting the common, all of us here, it's representing a narrow sector.
I think it's very interesting. We have an example going on right now as far as where politicians, where they have a certain basic premise of budgets and so forth, but then when something blows up locally, all of a sudden the theories that guided them in the past all of a sudden go by the wayside, just like on the closing of the hospital in Independence, was it?
Yes.
I mean, that to me is a clear indicator that when in fact a crisis occurs, obviously the whole philosophy of what they were about goes by the wind. You know?
And it needs to be said that Jeff King, the independence representative, who's been very staunchly opposed to Medicare, is from that area.
That's right.
I think perhaps from that town nearby. But at any rate, suddenly his mindset is having to shift because it's really affecting people in his area.
Yeah.
Whereas he'd been thinking about all those hospitals.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say that democracy is threatened and that people, the citizens, feel powerless, but may still defer to the elected officials. So let's kind of try to take the other side of that tension then. The idea that democracy requires more from a citizen than to vote or fail to vote, more than voting. And in this case, we're talking about deliberation and listening across the barriers or the normal listening wider than we normally hear. So does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, one thing that in doing that makes that difficult, I think, is that the mass media don't give us information. The mass media is so interested in the last football game or who got shot last night or you know, things like that there's no analysis really of what is important in terms of the long-term sustainability and resilience of our towns and of our culture generally.
I would agree with you, Paul. We're hyper-mediated and entertainment, you know, saturated culture, and it's kind of deflecting us. My wife, Janet, has a favorite phrase where politicians are arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic while the ship of state sinks. We're just so distracted with what the media is doing, we don't really have an honest picture of the enormity of what needs to be done.
We also have to remember, though, that the media is business, and it needs a bottom line, and that's what it feeds. It feeds us what sells, what they can make money on.
Yep.
And if it's something really pertinent we need to know, but they can't make money on it, they're not going to share it with us. They're not, now they used to, they've lost that capacity.
There was an interesting comment made by a psychologist years ago who was a consultant to one of the presidential campaigns, who said that the political campaign folks operate on the basis of 60% of the population never having moved beyond Piaget's concrete operations. So that
What does that mean?
what it means short comments,
sound bites.
quips, soundbite kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what we get, is the soundbite kind of thing. I mean, if you watch CNN, this week it's the Syrian refugees, but next week it may be, they were moving on to the flood actually in Utah, and next week it could be a landslide in Nepal. Nobody really does anything in depth as it seems like they did in the past. Woodward and Bernstein were on an interview with Bill Moyers a year or so ago, and they were saying that even the news media operates on this basis. They don't pay, reporters are not paid to do in-depth research on stories. It just doesn't pay. So
Yeah.
it moves the soundbite kind of thing, and what's current today will be gone tomorrow.
So-
News as entertainment's what it's become.
Yeah.
Actually,
and I think-
it's come to the point where if you want to really get some news, you go to the internet.
So let's try to talk about what we can do as citizens.
That's a
What's our
difficult, that's a
responsibility?
difficult question.
Well, I think, I think we have to admit, every one of us is guilty here. We're living in a culture that really nurtures, not enough listening, not enough looking, and so on. So I think if we were to take the responsibility to move us more deeply toward democratic process and toward what I would think of as good politics, and I think good politics brings us a lot closer to real spirituality. And when I say that, what I mean is good politics requires very deep listening and also very deep looking. You know, you've got to look for the information. You've got to require deeper processes among politicians and amongst ourselves. We have to listen more carefully to the truths that lie on the boundaries of the other side. And I don't see that happening, across our culture, because everything about our culture encourages a kind of a polarization, an artificial tension,
right.
a lack of community engagement, a lack of nourishing and standing on the common community ground.
Right.
And for me, that's why I understand people not running for offices that are high quality as we used to find in the past, because they are representing very narrow segments of the communities and not the whole community.
And that
And the community does not require as a litmus test the requirement of politicians to represent all spectrums, from the poor to the rich to the disenfranchised and so on. And we're not seeing that.
Yeah.
And we're not demanding that enough, and we're not taught to look to those places where it's not happening.
And it's because I think we have a journalistic, pugilistic paradigm. That is, if you've got two people with boxing gloves on in front of a camera representing two positions, not 3, 4, not any shades of gray, but two positions, then you have the makings of a show. Now, we at least have several people more than two. So I think this is a real step forward.
But we all seem to be agreeing with one another this evening.
Well,
You know,
not on
I-
everything,
No.
but go ahead, yeah.
Bringing different views.
I think, there's so much going through my head. I really think you made a comment that we're all guilty at some level, and I believe that's true. And I truly believe we live in a culture of fear. And I believe there are two things in life, fear and love. And if you're not acting out of love for self and others, you're working out of fear. And that's based on ego. And we have a culture of very strong egos, or on the other end, not so strong egos. I think the key on both ends are the same kind of thing, lack of confidence, inadequacy, all those kinds of things that are going on. So you said, Thea, what can we all do individually? And I think we all need to, as individuals, do our own self-examination and going to our core and healing whatever we need to heal. So then as we do come into community, we are feeling okay with speaking our truth and also okay with allowing others to speak their truth and not getting into this. We need to emotionally grow up.
Yes,
And
I
I
agree.
don't think
think
we
though-
have a culture that's emotionally
But I think that
grown
it's
up.
a question is what will work. I still remember a few years ago, a politician was, an elected official, talked about the fact, if I get one letter on a topic, I listen. If I get 10 letters in favor of the same thing, I consider changing my vote. I don't think that works. I mean, I've sent many letters, and I get these canned responses after it's all over, and it basically goes out to everybody. I'm trying to deal with your question as to what really does work, and I'm at a loss.
That's something that doesn't.
Hey, David.
I would like to ask our professors, do you see a lack of what you would call critical thinking or critical analysis in today's students? It seems like our canned approach, our benchmarks that have to be reached in the school is kind of doing away with the idea of learning to move from concrete to abstract thinking, learning to develop that critical analytical thinking that lets you change our culture. Do you see that in
Yeah,
the
I
students, or
think
how do
that's-
you motivate them? Maybe how you motivate them is a tool we can use.
I see that as one of our major tasks, actually, and that's why I think education is really at the heart of democratic process. It's at the heart of community and so on, and it starts at the family, it starts in kindergarten. I mean, it starts very young to really help people see themselves as a part of a community relationship. They're not just individuals on their own, they're a part of being responsible for other people as well as themselves, and doing that in a self-critical and communally critical kind of manner. And we have a culture that's evolved in such a self-centered way. Our culture is self-centered generally, I would say.
Ego-driven.
And ego-driven, and we're all colored by that.
We lack tolerance for the other person.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also the lack of depth of education based around, as you said, Elizabeth, around a monetary motive is a problem. When you have online education playing such a dominant role, even among established institutions, to bring in tuition monies to those institutions, and when you consider that, I'm not maligning all online courses, but in many cases then, if you watch a canned lecture that 250 people out in the hinterlands can see online, and if you can respond to one professor, you may have some brief interaction, but it is nothing like this kind of conversation. Nothing like it. You won't. And why is that? Because you can deliver credit hours more cheaply that way, and you can get people licensed. Money.
So I'd like to, go ahead.
Well, but I'm going to get back to the fear thing. I had a conversation Sunday morning with a farmer friend of mine who was talking about $4 wheat when the break-even cost is $5.29. And this disparity, do you put wheat in the ground? Do you leave it fallow? I mean, how do you survive? I mean, this is an agricultural community, and this is important. I mean, this is where people live. And we see the TV ads and the big cars and the pushing of, we hear about folks who make bazillions on Wall Street. But here's a guy whose career has been to provide food for the world, if not our country, who, with the price of the wheat market, it's pretty bleak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's real stuff. And who speaks to that? I mean, how do you get empowerment out of that business? That's.
Well, and
Well,
it's
here
not
we're
just
talking, we're talking about the market now.
Oh, yes.
And the fact that the markets are not really reflective of cost, and they're reflective more of who can make money from something. And if you can buy wheat at a low price and resell it higher, then you make money. And the farmer who isn't in as good a position to control, because there's just a whole bunch of them instead of one or a small group, they're at the mercy of
But
the
it's not
market.
just the farmer. It's the entire economic system of a community.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, I surely feel it.
Yeah.
I surely feel
Yeah.
it, yeah. So, and I'm not the only one. It's just the
And if
way
you
it
take,
is.
and you factor into that West Jackson and the Land Institute's posture that real agriculture that will sustain us is perennial, and that's years away from being a fact. Then imagine that same farmer saying, well, I'll just turn my land over to make it into native prairie. I'll just take the time to do that. You're talking 150-year process. He doesn't have the cash or the time to do that. So as Paul says, he's a victim of that system.
Well, there was a little snippet I heard on the news this morning about an ag conference, a machinery conference someplace here in the country. has gone on in just recent weeks. And they were talking about the size of the tractors and implements were just phenomenally large. They dwarfed the tractors and implements we have now. The tractors and implements we have now make what I used to drive as a kid look like a pull toy.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's-
And so to Paul's point, what does a small farmer do when he doesn't begin to have the cash to do that kind of operation?
But capitalism needs, they need to have everything, what's the word I want, you know, so it's obsolete. You have to keep replacing every so often,
Right.
very periodically, just to keep capitalism alive.
Right. You know, go ahead, Paul. You were
Well, yeah, this relates to the whole idea that we have to have growth. And the reason the economists talk about we have to have growth is because the way the money system works, the money system breaks down if we don't have growth. So, you know, that's one of the institutional structures that we have to start thinking about.
It doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't have to be that way, yeah.
So
Yeah,
multiplying
money is an agreement to use a system of accounting, and the system of accounting we've got does not serve us well.
Where we need the growth is within ourselves. That's where the growth really has to happen.
I think Thea's point that things don't have to be the way they are
Yeah.
is a part of what we're really talking about, because I think we get conditioned in the larger culture to say, well, that's just the way it is. You have to go with it. You have to play along with this game. And we lose sight of the fact that, you know, voting just for one election is not participation, because if things are going to be different, we have to be engaged in a process of reconstructing and redoing and rethinking and spending time looking at information that can then formulate some sort of alternative. And that takes all of us to do that. It's not just going to be one person or one bright representative or something that we send off. This is the collective responsibility, and it's easy to lose sight of that. And it's easy to get numb to the fact that things could change if we really genuinely wanted them to change.
You know, Gerald, there's part of us that brings us together is the fact that what is going on now is not sustainable.
Yeah,
and what is the best way
That's a very
to educate and do critical thinking to where we can make changes early
Yeah.
rather than later.
Especially now that they're trying to limit the people who can vote. It's so hard to be able to register to vote.
Right.
Now you either need a birth certificate or a passport. And I've talked recently to Don Merriman. He has 600 people on his rosters that have registered to vote but have not completed what they're supposed to do. They haven't brought in those certificates. And he said the problem is these people are probably people who only vote for presidential elections. And he's really concerned that they think that they are registered.
And there's a time limit. I mean, if they don't do it
Yeah,
within a
they're
certain
going to
time.
erase all of that, and those people are going to be gone. Now, those are the kind of laws that we need to get rid of, or the people who want to make them.
So I'd invite you to maybe think about what this moves you personally, or might move you to suggest that SRC do together. Just some of the ideas, because just to bring it to, okay, what does this mean for me in my life and in my action? What might I want to do from a conversation like this? Where does it take me? Or where might I suggest that it take this group, SRC?
I think I can respond to that, but I also want to get off my chest something that's been gnawing at me from the beginning of this whole conversation. Because, so let's take the workman I'm talking about. As Gerald says, we have to do more than just vote. Participation, so I'm very much on that side of the thing. If you just vote, yes, it's important, but you have not a snowball's chance in hell of accomplishing anything if you don't do more than that. My concern is that people who do then become active do things like, let me back up. I think there's a climate being created where people who want to take action and take control of their circumstances do so following a particular ideology, and the case I'm going to cite is an ideology, it's not my own. Sam Brownback called a town hall meeting in Leavenworth, Kansas, to talk about why we cannot take Guantanamo prisoners in Kansas, because our jails just aren't capable of handling them, and who knows what terrorists would come and strike us. Suddenly, Kansans have become the epitome of lily-livered, yellow-striped cowards when it comes to that. So 3 people got up and made very good, according to the Associated Press story, not a bias, this is not the Nation, it's not some leftist rag, it's the Associated Press. And they had 3 people reported who stood up and gave very good reasons why that's kind of foolish. They were booed off the stage because the people who came to Sam Brownback's town hall were supporters of the Brownback ideology and supporters of that perspective in this case. So my concern is that people who become active, how do we counteract people who do become active and yet become pawns of this ideology, who have a fascist crowd mentality? We need to address that. And so what I would do as part of the SRC is to get out and try to create forums, and this is what we've been talking about for, what, 2-3 years, creating forums and places where people can talk without that kind of hyper-emotionalism and can sit down and say, how do we solve these apparent issues?
Yeah.
And more than apparent.
How do you solve ideological rigidity? I think it's going to have to be the tools that we're going to develop.
It's going to take numbers. It's going to take numbers.
But again, I think it requires very deep listening to see why it is that people respond so profoundly to a non-critical ideological perspective. What is it about that? Because that's the level of neighborhood listening I think we have to engage in, because that also can help other people listen if they're listening.
I gotta say something
There's a
to
human
that.
being in there. There's a
I
human
think
being in there.
it's easy for us to lose sight of that. And it's really a critical next step, because I think we have to be moving to a higher level, of higher perspective on these things.
I think it starts with what we eat. I'm sorry, but it does. You know, processed foods fog the brain. If your brain is foggy, your energy dissipates. You're pretty apathetic. You just let everybody else do it around you. And so I think awakening that.
Yeah, I think that, not to get into the food thing, I wanted to, I know that our representative brags about all these town hall meetings that he has throughout his district. I know that if we were to attend some of them, that we probably would face the same kind of reaction that happened at the governor's public hearing. But maybe that's something that we should consider, organizing people that would go to these town hall meetings and be prepared to get reactions, but at least an opportunity for people to listen and for us to listen to them. I almost am afraid to go to one of these meetings because I know that I would not feel comfortable.
Well, I agree with that. Okay, well, I agree with that. Don't we still have, those are so controlled, such controlled environments, don't we maybe need to go somewhere else? Go ahead, LANAY, I'm sorry.
Well, I think where we need to go on a much smaller scale is having community conversations that allows people to come and speak their truth with a feeling that they'll be respected and heard. Keep politics out of it, and talk person to person, human being to human being, and get beyond all of this other stuff that we've been bringing up. Not that that's not part of life, but we need to get to the very core of it and enlighten one another in that everyone is somebody. And then you get more people at a grassroots level feeling, wow, maybe I can be in charge of my life instead of being controlled out here by politicians, you know, and media and materialism and all those things.
So, LANAY, what do we talk about at the meeting, and how do we get people there without understanding?
Well, we invite them. We set up, I envision, we set up some meetings. You know, I'd mentioned in one of our meetings that I'd like to see us bring on board, you know, Salina conversation on compassion and kindness. And so we organize with inviting people to come and speaking their truth. And we all know people. We all know people that we could invite, and would be a cross-section of everyone in our community, you know. And so you start at the core.
So I'm looking at the time, and it's about time to do a closing round. So everybody has one more chance to make a closing statement. We started there. You want to start here, and just anything you want to say to that you, an insight, a thought, a idea that came out of this for you, or gratitude if that's where you are.
Well, we're presented with problems that we aren't given data, and we aren't given permission to even talk about. And I guess the first thing we have to do is give ourselves permission to talk about these issues. And once we do that, then, and we have to give ourselves permission to disagree about things and still get along with each other. And that's a start.
I guess for people watching this program, and I hope that there will be many, they ought to go to spiritualityresourcecenter.com and make comments. But more importantly, try to do what somewhat LANAY is talking about, and the rest of us. Start a conversation about compassion, kindness, about whatever issues are important, and see if you can't get that kind of, you know, pockets of that kind of discussion going.
Yes, that's certainly what I'd like to see. We need to get to the core, and all this stuff on the outsider self isn't going to do it. It's an inside job. And if we can all do our inside work, whatever that is, then a lot of this will fall by the wayside, because then we come to know and love ourselves and know that we have a right to speak our truth and what that truth is. And then as we can do that, a lot of this out here will take care of itself.
I think we need to give ourselves permission and encourage ourselves, but also and others, to step outside our normal boundaries, our normal tribal groups, because I think we've really retreated into tribal groups that think and behave much like we do, and so that insulation keeps us from learning things we actually, each one of us needs to grow. So I'd encourage myself and everyone here and everybody in the audience really to take some initiative to listen carefully to somebody in another situation, in another group, and so on. Yes. Because that's a part of the dialogue, and as we outreach into other community conversations, just to invite people to come in and to challenge, well, us, but challenge everybody to be open to stepping over those boundaries.
Mm-hmm. I think that we all kind of share a frustration. I think that we think the task is impossible. The one thing that I think Gerald alludes to is the importance of not having an effect on ourselves as far as what we do with our time and our attitude and our willingness to listen. And I think that at least we can control our own self. And hopefully that by our relationships with those that may not agree with us, that at least they know where we stand and our willingness to listen to them.
I would suggest that we embrace the adventure of curiosity and be willing to seriously listen to someone else, even if they're over here and we're over here. There's a middle ground. Let's find it. Let's find it.
I'm just sitting here thinking how comfortable my chair feels at home. And my wife is the one who bugs me a lot, you know, to have people come in, and I think this chair just feels really great, you know. But the other side of it, of the coin, is, you know, anything that's new and different it builds a certain amount of anxiety and feels uncomfortable. And unless we feel uncomfortable, or as I learned working in the emergency room, if you don't have a bit of anxiety or driving the freeways around Houston, Texas, if you don't feel a little anxiety driving the freeway, you're probably not alive, and you may not get to your
That's a good point.
Adding to Thea's comment that there's a human being inside, I've been involved in resident education, and many times a resident will come out frustrated. I gave them all this health advice, and I see it fell on deaf ears with blank stares. We teach our residents what is called motivational interviewing, and it's just pretty much what we've talked about, the idea of giving people permission to speak, people permission to tell their story. And oftentimes residents would come back in tears, not really fully understanding why a patient doesn't respond to certain medical advice. They discover 2 jobs, a family separation, substance abuse in there. And I think they come out with more understanding and compassion for the problems that deal with those human beings. And I think that's one of the purposes of the Spiritual Resource Center, is to try to see people as human beings, to see people with problems, and try to help understand, and in so doing, have a dialogue that might create change.
Thank you. This was a delightful conversation.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was.
I want to invite the viewers to come to a deliberation, a public deliberation that'll use a similar format on October 7th with Talk Salina. That's the Center for Public Life that I mentioned earlier. Talk Salina is focused on what should we do to address criminal justice issues in Salina. So we're going to be thinking about whether we should maintain and increase incarceration, and then the tensions around that. We're going to look at prevention and behavior change and the drawbacks or the tensions around that, and then changing the legal system and the drawbacks and the tensions around that. So we're going to try to come at it from many angles, and all these ideas came from the people of Salina. So we developed a discussion guide and the tensions from among a wide range of citizens here, and we hope that a wide range of people will participate. There'll be table facilitators. The groups will be about this size, and we'll follow a similar structure so that the conversation is safe and hopefully very creative, because that's what we need. Criminal justice affects all of us as taxpayers, as potential victims or potential offenders, and of course it affects the harmony and the stability of our community. So I hope you come on October 7th at 4 o'clock or at 7 o'clock.
And Thea, don't the conversations extend beyond October 7th and perhaps even beyond that particular topic?
This is the one we have planned right now.
Yeah.
We can certainly do more.
And may there be other conversations about that topic beyond October 7th?
There could be, sure. If there's interest, sure.
Where did you say
You
it
didn't
will
mention
be?
where that would be.
Okay, I think it's going to be on the slide that Janet's going to show, but where it will be, there'll be one at 4 o'clock and one at 7 o'clock. And the 4 o'clock one is at the class building across the street from the library on Elm. And the 7 o'clock one is at the Chamber of Commerce Annex on Ash.
Good.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.